بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب زدني علما.
Now let's try to understand the role of certificates in our SD-WAN networks. In SD-WAN networks also, we will be requiring to authenticate the controllers. So what we'll be doing is we'll be using our own vManage, and we have our vSmart, as well as we have our vBond devices. These are the controllers. Now these controllers need to make sure that they authenticate each other, and that is done with the help of certificates. So here we'll be using digital certificates. So which means we also require a CS server, a certificate authority, which is required. Now again, when it comes to certificate authority, either I can use, if I'm hosting this SD-WAN network in cloud, so if you're hosting this in any of a cloud environment, then you can use the internet, and because normally they will be connecting to internet, and you can use any of internet public's CS, means the public's CS, you can use them. You can use any of the CA like VeriSign. There are different organizations. So they will be providing you the certificates, and you can have an external CA which can be used. But let's say if in your organization, you're going to set up an SD-WAN network on premises, and you don't want to use any external CA, then you can make your own CA server. So you can run any of your operating systems, like with Cisco, again, we'll be using a Microsoft CA, the Microsoft Certificate Authority, which will be using, and which will be issuing the certificates to the devices or the nodes where they will be authenticating each other. So they will be providing you something called signed certificates. So we'll talk about this, what is exactly signed certificates. So here, every device has to share his information with CA, and the CA is going to send back some signed certificate, which is like proving their own identities, just like kind of stamp on their own certificate, saying that, okay, these certificates belongs to these users and they are trusted. And later on, when they talk to each other, they will be using these signed certificates for authenticating each other. So this is mainly to prevent any unauthorized device or any attacker trying to add any device in the network and trying to spoof as if he's a vManage or vSmart. So we don't want any of the unknown device to be a part of the network. So at the back end, the nodes will be authenticating each other based on these certificates. So the first one will be using something called signed certificates issued by the CA. Now these certificates will be authenticating the devices inside your overlay network, like the vManage and the vBond and the vSmart. They will be authenticating each other because they generate their own certificates, and then they will be sending them to the CA, signed by the CA, and then later on will be installing these certificates on their own devices, and based on these certificates they will be authenticated, because you must make sure that these certificates are properly installed or properly configured for authentication process to be successful. Because once the authentication is successful, then only you can establish connections between them. Because once you establish once you finish the authentication, then we can say that we are establishing a secure connection between the devices. So initially we'll be seeing this part. Later on, once we add the WAN edge devices, so we'll be adding our WAN devices, VH devices, and these VH devices need to be a part of the network. Now, in order to add these devices, we'll be using a little bit different way. We'll be using some kind of serial file, and this serial file will include some kind of token and the serial number, which is issued from Cisco Viptela, which is kind of unique code. And this information needs to be added onto the vManage. And whenever this WAN device comes up, it's going to use the token, and based on the token, it's going to identify that particular router or any new device which is being added, the WAN device, is valid or not. So all these things we do from the vManage. So by sitting on the vManage, we can do all this process. So The WAN edge authorization is something a little bit different than the controller. So the first part will be doing the controllers, and then when we come to the WAN edge, we'll also see the process a little bit more on that. Now, keep in mind, you must install these certificates on the devices, especially here the controllers, your vManage, vBond, and the vSmarts. You must install these certificates. And on the WAN edge, you must install the kind of serial file. There is some process for that. Okay, so without doing this process, the devices will not communicate with each other, will not authenticate each other. So the first step, once you set up your network, once we add the devices like we did, we added these devices. So we need to make sure that we configure one internal CS server, and this CS server is responsible for providing the certificates in our network for this SD-WAN topology.